Greetings, everyone. My name is Carla Denon, and I am the Senior Director of Workforce Development here at the Fortune Society. I am also a member of our Policy Center Collective, which is a diverse group of community advocates for criminal justice reform. And welcome to Both Sides of the Bar, which is a discussion driven show that examines the legal system from various perspectives, including people who've been most impacted by the criminal legal system. We discuss in this show critical questions about how the current system works, its intersections with social justice, and we highlight the efforts that are being made to improve the lives of everyone who's been affected. And we ask you, the viewers, to spread the word about both sides of the bar and share your comments with us on Twitter, which is now referred to as X for most people. And our name is the Fortune Society. And today's show, which I'm very excited about, is entitled Elevating the Issues Facing Women's Justice. Women remain one of the fastest growing groups in the criminal legal system, yet their experiences, needs, and pathways into the system are often overlooked. In today's episode, we will explore the unique challenges women face and why centering women's justice is essential to building healthier families and stronger communities. Our guest today is Dr. Topeka K. a nationally known advocate for women's justice and a formerly incarcerated leader whose work has transformed reentry support for women nationwide. And I want to pause there just to allow Dr. Sam to introduce herself. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Carla. I really appreciate it.
We're very excited. And I want to kick it off with something a little bit fun. You were actually recently honored at Fortune Society's 2025 Justice in Action Gala. I wanted to just hear from you. You had this excellent speech, and it really was a moving moment for all of us there, especially a lot of us women. But I wanted to hear from you. What did it mean to you to receive the Reentry Champion Award?
Well, it always humbles me when I receive an award like the Reentry Champion, Award, especially when it comes from my peers, right? I look at Fortune Society as my peers, people who work within the same space while I've been doing work for decades longer than I even knew what was going on inside of prisons. Um, Such a huge honor at both Stanley and the chair, Mr. Kozlowski, and then also, in my city, New York. So it was a beautiful, beautiful gala. It was put together so wonderfully, but it was one of the greatest honors of 2020.
Absolutely. And you look beautiful as well. I do have to
Thank
share that with the guests. Um, but yeah, I would also love if you could share a little bit about your journey through the federal system and just talk about your experience and knowledge.
Yeah, so I was incarcerated from 2012 through 2015, and for a first time nonviolent drug offense and conspiracy, I should say. And so it was an eye opener, an awakening for me of the things that were actually happening within the legal system because it happened my first time in. Now, while obviously I wasn't new to the legal system, I had friends, family members who had been incarcerated. Myself having been arrested before and gone through that, that side of things. But I thought people who actually were in prison, especially as related to women, it was because they did something, egregious, something, that maybe I saw in cops and thought like this is what's really happening inside of prisons. And so these people deserve to be there. And it wasn't until I began my journey in the county jail in Virginia that I realized quickly that that wasn't the case. That women specifically that I was in with were being criminalized for poverty, for substance misuse. I would see them come and leave and come and leave. And, next time I would hear that they didn't come back because they overdosed. And so in my mind, I could never understand why people, the community, the law enforcement, the system were failing people who struggled, with different traumatic experiences that led them through the system. And because they weren't mental health clinics or hospitals or places for people really to get the treatment that they needed because it was outpriced, right? That they use prisons as kind of, that place that they would just warehouse people. And so through that journey, going then being convicted and going to federal prison, it was much of the same. Women being primary caregivers of dependent children, women also being, caregivers of dependent parents, right? As we age, our parents get older and they need us. Whether they were educated greatly, doctors, lawyers, senators, judges, or was in extreme poverty and didn't have, high levels of education. It still was the same underlying issues for women, trauma, early childhood trauma, sexual trauma and violence, and, situations that did not lead to wellness, wholeness, and healing, which eventually landed us in prison. And so, through my journey there, meeting women of different socioeconomic backgrounds, different lived experiences, and through my own kind of spiritual realignment, I would say, because I always knew who God was, God spoke to me and said I needed to create an organization that would help to provide opportunities for women specifically, which look like housing, and create platforms for women to use their voice to share their experiences. Because I felt that if people heard the voices and cries and saw the faces of women who were incarcerated, that there would be no woman or girl in prison or jail.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate that. And also, it was interesting to hear a little bit more about your time in Virginia. That's kind of that is the state where I grew up, and the Commonwealth of Virginia is very unkind to those who are impacted by the criminal legal system. Can you talk to me a little bit about, and you mentioned this somewhat, but what do you think are some of the most um, s- outstanding differences of the experience of incarceration when you compare the impact to women as opposed to men?
Yeah, as I mentioned, mothers, right? While we have fathers, typically women who are incarcerated are the primary caregiver of the dependent child, whether the man goes to prison or, women being a single mother. So there's that. Also, the experiences that lead women to prison. While, all people, I believe that have experienced some type of lifetime trauma, women specifically have been survivors of sexual trauma and violence and early childhood trauma at a much higher rate than men, at least reported. Because we also do know that there's huge stigmas and things that also come around reporting early childhood trauma and sexual trauma and violence by both genders, right? Um, Additionally, women being, I mentioned, caregivers of dependent adults, parents, often, when I went to prison, I don't have children, but, I did have older parents. And while they still needed me, I didn't live with them, but I helped out a great deal. And so my greatest fear was that I would lose them during my incarceration because they were older and weren't in the greatest health. Um, when you think about also taking care of the household, right? A lot of times, women, especially today, are, economically more responsible for their households if they're single parents, or just having to take care of themselves as single women. And so, when you think about these things, there is a complete difference that lead us into incarceration. And then once we're there, we're also treated differently. I remember having the courses that were offered to us were knitting, crocheting, plastic canvas, and beading that look very different than the HVAC, CDL, and different types of trade classes that men were offered. I said, "What am I gonna do with knitting and crochet?" I mean, that wasn't my thing, but, so there's that. When I think about, the healthcare system, the fact that we had to purchase tampons and pads at the time when I was incarcerated, and why should we have to do that? That should be products that are given to us because we're in the care of the institution, and that's something that we need. Why should we have to pay for them? Which also leads to why do we have to pay them in the street? But that's another conversation for another time, right? The fact toilet tissue, you would be given maybe a roll of toilet tissue like men, but women again, we have different needs, right? Different things that occur, whether it's our cycles or or other things during the month that may require us to use more toilet paper than it will a man. And so why are you also expecting us to be able to use the same amount of toilet tissue when, our bodies aren't even created the same? So, that I mean, I could go on and on and on. The fact that when I go back to the children, the fact that, you're left thousands of miles sometimes in certain cases away from your family with, caregivers who can't afford to travel in that way. And typically, women are the ones bringing the children to see men who are incarcerated. So when women are incarcerated, who brings the kids to see them? Right. So all of these are, small examples um, of what the difference is that happens to women while going through the system, what leads us to the system and going through the system. And coming home, it's the same. Often women fear where they're going to live. They think that if they were in a relationship, it might have been an unhealthy one. So they don't want to go back to it, but where are they going to, stay? Many didn't have family they could go to like I did. And so you're subjected to the shelter system where you're fighting for a bed every single day, or it is unhealthy, right? The conditions are not suitable for anyone. There's abuse and violence that happens in those places, so you're unsafe. You go back into an abusive relationship just because, or you go back to sex work because you try to get money in order to get your children back and or to, get somewhere safe to live. So these are things that women face because typically when men come home, they come home to women. That's the difference.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And you discussed a lot of the urgent unmet needs that are happening while people are still incarcerated. And then you also talked a little bit about housing as being a major unmet need for women as they return home. In addition to housing, what are two other major unmet needs that you think women are facing as they return home from incarceration?
Well, the number one is housing, as you mentioned, and the I would say the number two is also help with getting their children, family reunification. Because often, the children are left with either a family member, a friend, or they're in the system. And so, sometimes people think they're better for the child than the mother is themselves. And that's not necessarily true. And so it's having to fight the system for your children and then to fight people that you love that you thought were going to be just there temporarily to support you through your journey. Then it's jobs. We already know that women are paid less than men, period, right? And then you think about what it feels like to be a woman with a conviction. So you're really not looked at. And then when you think of being a woman of color with a conviction, then it's like you're really, really not looked at for opportunities or looked over for them. And so it leaves women again in these vulnerable situations with trying to really rebuild their lives and get themselves, back on their feet.
Absolutely. So definitely, I would agree that housing, family reunification, and workforce are definitely major unmet needs of women. And also, having been a child of someone formerly incarcerated, I think also I would add that just making sure that we have time for self care and wellness for the women who are returning home, because oftentimes women are dealing with shame at just such a high rate that will
Yeah,
often prohibit them from moving forward
that's
as
right.
as you possibly can. Would you like to add anything there?
I would 100% agree. When you think about, mental health and wellness, you think about physical health and wellness, self-care, all of that. Typically, women don't even know what self-care means. I'm happy to see this movement that now today, but depending on where you are financially really determines the self-care that you can be afforded. Right? Can I afford to take a wellness day from work in order to do XYZ? Yeah, I might be able to take off, but can I really treat myself to something? That's not the case for many people, especially prison in the world. So definitely, and then access to healthcare, quality healthcare for women, as we know, and again, stressing underlying women of color around the maternal health morbidity rates. You think about where I am now, perimenopause, and the lack of education and knowledge around that, and having to suffer through that, both incarcerated and also in community. Just knowing about your own, sexual health, all of that. We don't talk about it often. What do you need to do to take care of yourself? If you are going to be back into, active relationships, What should you be looking out for? What tests should you be taking for yourself and your partner? Are we testing our hormones and seeing where we are? All of that also leans into our mental wellness. And so we don't talk about that. And it's definitely not given to women who are incarcerated, which is something that we are working very, very hard to change.
Absolutely. We're going to shift a little bit and talk a little bit. You have been such an avid supporter of Fortune's Women Rising program, and both Women's Rising and your Ladies of Hope ministry are grounded in storytelling, community, and peer leadership. Why do you think those elements are so powerful for women who are navigating the reentry process?
So often women are the voiceless. We're the most vulnerable of all people. And we are, to your point earlier, that we leave different types of situations, right? Whether it's incarceration, whether it's a bad relationship, whether it's a job with lots of grief and shame. And so the fact that we deal with these things, it's really, really hard, right? For women to begin to figure out even which way they're going to go. And so to empower yourself to utilize your voice. When I think about even the fact that, I often tell myself sometimes, no is a complete answer. And women, we often have a hard time saying no. We say yes to everything. And so, learning how to say no, learning on how to advocate for yourself, learning that you are control of your destiny and where you want to go, and knowing that you are worthy of a second chance, a third chance in some cases, even a fifth. And so I think that it is important to empower women to use their voice to share their story. Like, I'm not a person that believes I'm the voice of the voiceless. I like to create platforms and give tools to women to be able to use their voice to share their own story, because I cannot talk about being a mom in prison, but another sister can, right? I can't talk about being a daughter of an incarcerated loved one, but you could, right? I can't talk about those things, nor should I. And if I am able to if I'm a great leader, I will share the right tools and information to people to empower them to be able to do it themselves. And so that's exactly what I know we are all, and I say us and Ladies of Hope and also Fortune, are trying to do as it relates to storytelling. And then it also allows people to see us as people. Yes, we may have made a mistake, but who hasn't? And yes, we deserve a second chance, but so does everyone. There's no perfect man, not even one. And so it allows people to see that, yes, I am smart and articulate and beautiful and hardworking and innovative and all of the things. And so yeah, I made some choices in my life that led me through different experiences, but that's experience are not the sum of who I am, right? And so unless I know how to articulate that in a way that allows people to really see who I am, that, they will have their own assumptions based on what they may read or what they may have heard. And so when you are able to share your own story and center yourself in that with power and confidence, then it forces other people to listen.
I really appreciate how you discussed the importance of like this community building through storytelling and allowing us to, teach those. There's some women who may not know how to articulate themselves a certain way. There's some women who really find that to be an easy process. And by creating that community, we can lean on one another to help really grow and escalate the advocacy around this really important
Mhm.
piece. What do you think it means to build a gender responsive and trauma informed justice system for for women? And where do you see any promising examples of that happening?
So what I feel it means, I laugh because what I feel it means is that there should be no woman or girl in prison. That's how you respond to. That's the type of programming we need. Keep mothers and women in community. Give them tools to heal from outside of the prison walls. That there are ways to hold people accountable while healing them, and that's period. Do I feel that people, maybe should go a place or two to get a little time out? I do. That means a break, right, from what it is that they know, so they can learn something different. Does it look like what we see now in the U.S. prison system? No. When I think about systems, at heart, I believe that um, people only know what they know. And so if I am living a particular lifestyle or going down a particular path, it is one because of what I know, what maybe I've been exposed to, or what I may feel in that particular moment is, what I can do, right? I think affording people the opportunity to learn new things, to open up people to experiences that they may not have had the opportunity to do, to remind people that they are worthy to have what we call the American dream. And it may not look at like where they're from. It can look like something else, but you can dream what you want. And then today you can actually create it. So I think, what we do at Lays of Hope is really empowering people with the tools that they need in order to do that. To put people in beautiful housing, to understand you deserve this, to share experiences. And, I try to live my life unapologetically and, on purpose so that people can see that, yes, I might have been in a prison for several years and that was an experience in my life, but I also travel the world and I also, like nice things because I work hard and I deserve it. So when I think of, gender responsive care, especially for women, it is showing women that they are worthy, giving the tools that they need in order to be able to feel empowered to rebuild their lives in the way they deem fit and necessary, not what someone else does, and keep women out of prison. Like that's the best way to respond to women in prison. Keep them out.
I like that. That's the new campaign, Keep Women and Girls Out. I
Mhm.
love that. If you could change one policy or practice tomorrow that would most improve the lives of women in the criminal legal system, what would it be and why?
Well, I said keep women out of prison, and that would be number one. That would be the policy that I would number one want to put in. Look, if you are um, a first time person, violent or not violent, right? I don't want to specify, but a first time person, and that there were, different circumstances that led you to whatever the situation was, that we should find alternatives to incarceration, even if it was something that was violent. Because typically we find with women, violence are usually isolated events. That's number one. Number two, policies that we already see that are working, like some of the domestic violence, like DBJ, SJA in New York, the Set Her Free bill in New Jersey, and other bills where they are really looking at women who have been sentenced to like lengthy sentences, life, that they are now able to reconsider the circumstances that led them to this violent crime and let them come back to court. Right. I think that's fair because often they don't look at self defense as a way of saying that that is enough, for a woman in violence. There's primary caregivers legislation that we see that if it's a mother that is a woman or a parent, well, mother of a dependent child, um, does not have to go to prison. They can do like alternative court systems, different things, instead of sending them to jail. That keeps the families together, keeps the mother in the community, and does not send the child to prison with them. Speaking of, I would like to end nurseries in prison. I think that if a mother is safe enough to be with her baby in prison, she is safe enough to be with her baby in community. There are programs that have, like the federal system has the MIT program, right? It may be, it's different. They may be in a community based kind of center. Some of them look like trailers. Some of them look like others. They don't look like, it's not the prison, where they're able to stay with their baby for a period of time. But then after that, I think if they've been with their child in this program for 3 years, they should and they did well, let them stay with their child. Let them report to probation or some type of reporting mechanism where, if it's the court monthly or, the probation monthly until maybe, they can show that they have, did the time, if you will, in a more healthier way in order
Mhm.
to child. I don't believe that separating children from their mom, especially newborn children, is helpful. And I damn sure, excuse me, don't think that you should lock babies up. And as if that's okay because you're keeping the mom with the child. No, get the mom out of the jail, have her stay with her baby and a life together there. And then that's it. That's how I see it. So I think those are solid. I mean,
Like,
obviously, I
that's great.
don't
No,
have a lot
those
of,
no, I
so
love that. And we are getting ready to close, but I do have one more question that I have to ask. If you could share with our listeners one step that you would recommend for them to help elevate women's justice in their all community, what would it be? And how should they follow the leadership of women with lived experience like yourself?
Well, one step that women can take is take a step forward. I think it is you, whether you've been incarcerated, the carceral system um, involves so many of us. And so whether it's you or somebody whether it's going to visit a prison to help and support a woman who's inside, I think you are, the cliche, you're the change that you want to see. I searched high and low for support when I was inside, knowing, and it was really research because I had family that I could go home to. I had friends and support network. So I knew I didn't necessarily need what other people needed. Right. But what I can say is that, um, I didn't find what it was that I was looking for. And so I created it. And that was the responsibility that I felt God put on me. And it was what I decided to be my driving force for my life's work. And so for women, we have to believe in ourselves. We have to lead in love, but also in confidence. We have to know that we are chosen, right? They say Mother Earth, we are the ones that are, the holders of all things. And we have that power within ourselves in order to change all things. I'm a firm believer of that. So take the step.
Dr. Topeka Sam, it has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. And to our
Thank
guests, thank you for giving us your thoughts and observations about the intersections of women and incarceration. I know you guys are at home coming up with great ideas to put a lot of what Dr. Sam has shared with us today into practice. I want to thank all of you for viewing our show today and for just participating in this thought provoking discussion. And in the meantime, on the behalf of the Fortune Society, we thank you so much for tuning in to both sides of the bar. If you're interested in learning more about the Fortune Society, please check us out on our website, fortunesociety.org, or on Facebook by typing in the Fortune Society. Again, this is Carla Denault, and I appreciate you for joining us as we critically look at both sides of the bar.